How did the United States grow from a small group of colonies into one of the largest nations in the world? The story of America is not only about independence but also about expansion, exploration, and ambition. After gaining freedom from Britain in 1783, the young nation faced an important question about its future. Most Americans lived along the eastern coast of the continent, but beyond the Appalachian Mountains stretched enormous lands that were still largely unknown to the new nation. These lands were filled with forests, rivers, mountains, and fertile plains. For many Americans, the West represented opportunity. Farmers dreamed of owning large pieces of land, traders imagined new routes for commerce, and political leaders believed expansion would make the country stronger and more secure. One of the most important moments in early American expansion came in 1803, when the United States made a historic agreement with France. Through this agreement, known as the Louisiana Purchase, the United States acquired a massive territory that stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. With this single decision, the size of the United States nearly doubled. The president responsible for this bold move was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson believed that land ownership was essential for the success of the new republic. He imagined a nation where independent farmers could live freely and build prosperous communities across the continent. However, purchasing the land created a new problem. Very little was known about the geography of the territory. Americans did not know where the major rivers flowed, what mountains existed in the region, or which Native American tribes lived there. To explore this unknown land, Jefferson organized one of the most famous expeditions in American history. The expedition was led by two explorers named Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. In 1804, Lewis and Clark began their journey from St. Louis with a small group of soldiers, interpreters, and guides. Their mission was to explore the Louisiana Territory and find a route to the Pacific Ocean. The journey was extremely difficult and dangerous. The explorers traveled through thick forests, across wide rivers, and over massive mountain ranges. They faced harsh winters, food shortages, and unfamiliar terrain. Along the way they encountered many Native American tribes who had lived on these lands for centuries. Some tribes welcomed the explorers and offered help by sharing knowledge about the land and its rivers. Others were cautious and uncertain about the intentions of the expanding American nation. These encounters showed that westward expansion would not only bring exploration, but also cultural contact and future conflict. After nearly 2 years of travel, Lewis and Clark finally reached the Pacific Ocean. Their expedition successfully mapped large areas of the continent and proved that travel across the vast western lands was possible. News of their discoveries spread quickly across the United States. Many Americans became excited about the possibility of moving west and starting new lives on fresh land. Soon pioneers began preparing for long journeys across the continent. Families packed their belongings into covered wagons and joined wagon trains heading toward the frontier. They crossed wide plains, dangerous rivers, and rugged mountain paths in search of opportunity and land. New settlements began appearing across the western territories, slowly transforming the landscape of North America. However, this expansion also created tension and conflict. Native American tribes saw their traditional lands being taken by settlers who were supported by the growing power of the United States government. As more Americans moved westward, conflicts between settlers and native tribes became increasingly common. Despite these challenges, many Americans believed that their country had a special destiny to expand across the entire continent. This belief became known as manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was destined to stretch from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean. This powerful idea would shape American politics, migration, and conflict for many decades, leading the country into one of the most dramatic periods of expansion in its history. As the idea of westward expansion spread across the United States, thousands of Americans began preparing for the long journey toward the frontier. The land beyond the Mississippi River promised opportunity, farmland, and a new beginning. Many families believed that moving west would allow them to escape poverty and build a better future. Covered wagons became the symbol of this movement. Entire families packed their belongings, food supplies, tools, and livestock into large wooden wagons and began traveling across the plains. These wagon trains moved slowly across vast grasslands, crossing rivers and climbing mountain paths that had never been used by large groups of settlers before. The journey was extremely dangerous. Travelers faced disease, harsh weather, food shortages, and attacks from bandits or hostile groups. Despite these dangers, the promise of land continued to attract more settlers every year. One of the most important routes used by these pioneers became known as the Oregon Trail. This trail stretched for more than 2,000 miles and connected the eastern United States to the fertile lands of the Pacific Northwest. Thousands of settlers followed this trail during the 19th century. The journey often took several months, and many families lost loved ones along the way due to illness or accidents. Yet the dream of reaching the western lands kept them moving forward. As more settlers moved west, the United States government also began encouraging expansion. Political leaders believed that a larger nation would be stronger economically and militarily. This belief was connected to a powerful idea that was spreading across the country known as manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was the belief that the United States was destined to expand across the entire North American continent. Many Americans believed that their culture, government, and economic system should spread from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. This idea influenced many important decisions made by political leaders during the 19th century. One of the most significant moments of expansion occurred in 1845, when the United States annexed Texas. Texas had previously been part of Mexico, but American settlers living there had rebelled against Mexican rule and declared independence. Eventually, Texas joined the United States, but this decision created tension between the United States and Mexico. These tensions soon exploded into conflict. In 1846, the United States and Mexico went to war in what became known as the Mexican-American War. The conflict lasted for 2 years and ended in 1848, when Mexico signed a treaty giving a vast amount of territory to the United States. Through this agreement, the United States gained lands that would later become California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and parts of several other states. This enormous expansion dramatically changed the map of North America and brought the United States closer to its goal of reaching the Pacific Ocean. At the same time, another event was attracting thousands of people to the Western Territories. In 1848, gold was discovered in California. News of this discovery spread rapidly across the world and triggered what became known as the California Gold Rush. Thousands of people from the United States and other countries rushed to California, hoping to become rich by finding gold. Mining camps and small towns quickly appeared across the region as fortune seekers searched rivers and mountains for precious metal. Although only a small number of people became truly wealthy, the gold rush transformed California into one of the fastest growing regions in North America. Cities expanded rapidly, trade increased, and the population of the Western Territories grew faster than ever before. However, the expansion of the United States continued to create conflict with Native American tribes who had lived on these lands for generations. Many tribes were forced to leave their homes as settlers claimed more territory. In some cases, the government signed treaties promising protection for native lands, but these agreements were often broken as settlers continued moving west. These conflicts created a long and painful chapter in American history that would continue for many decades. Despite these tensions, westward expansion continued to shape the identity of the United States. The frontier became a symbol of freedom, opportunity, and adventure for many Americans. Stories of explorers, pioneers, and settlers traveling into the unknown became an important part of the national imagination. By the middle of the 19th century, the United States had grown dramatically larger than the original 13 colonies that had declared independence in 1776. The nation was no longer just a small country along the Atlantic coast. It was becoming a continental power stretching across vast lands and diverse landscapes. Yet this expansion also created new political challenges. As new territories joined the nation, leaders were forced to confront an increasingly dangerous question that threatened to divide the country. The question was whether slavery would be allowed in the new Western territories. This issue would soon push the United States toward one of the most devastating conflicts in its history. As the United States continued expanding across the continent, the country was growing larger and stronger, but new problems were beginning to appear. Every time a new territory joined the nation, American leaders faced the same difficult question: would slavery be allowed in the new lands or not? In the early years of the United States, slavery already existed in several southern states, where large plantations depended on enslaved labor to grow crops like cotton and tobacco. Meanwhile, many northern states had begun moving away from slavery and supported a different economic system based on industry and free labor. As the nation expanded westward, this difference between the northern and southern states became more intense. Both sides wanted to influence whether the new territories would allow slavery. If more slave states joined the country, southern political power would increase. If more free states were created, northern leaders would gain greater influence in Congress. One of the earliest attempts to control this growing conflict was the Missouri Compromise of 1820. This agreement tried to keep a balance between free states and slave states by allowing Missouri to join the Union as a slave state, while Maine entered as a free state. The compromise also created a line across the Louisiana Territory. Territories north of this line would not allow slavery, while territories south of it could decide differently. For a time, this compromise reduced tensions, but the underlying problem did not disappear. As more Americans moved westward, the pressure to decide the future of these territories increased again. At the same time, the United States continued gaining more land through treaties and negotiations. New territories brought opportunities for farmers, merchants, and settlers who were searching for land and wealth. Railroads began connecting distant parts of the country, making travel and trade faster than ever before. Towns grew into cities, and the American economy expanded rapidly. Yet expansion also meant that Native American tribes faced even greater pressure. Many tribes were forced to move from their traditional lands as settlers claimed new territories. The United States government passed laws that pushed Native American communities west of the Mississippi River. One of the most tragic results of this policy became known as the Trail of Tears. During the 1830s, thousands of Native Americans from tribes such as the Cherokee were forced to leave their homes and travel long distances to unfamiliar lands in the West. The journey was harsh, and many people died along the way from hunger, disease, and exhaustion. The Trail of Tears became one of the darkest chapters in the history of westward expansion. While these conflicts were happening, millions of immigrants from Europe were arriving in the United States searching for opportunity and freedom. Many of these immigrants settled in growing cities, while others joined wagon trains heading toward the frontier. The population of the country increased quickly, and the demand for land continued to grow. By the middle of the 19th century, the United States had transformed dramatically from the small nation that had gained independence only decades earlier. Railroads stretched across long distances, new states joined the Union, and the population expanded westward across plains and mountains. Yet beneath this growth and progress, the nation was becoming deeply divided over the issue of slavery. Political debates became more intense, and conflicts between northern and southern leaders became harder to resolve. The expansion of the United States had created enormous wealth and opportunity, but it had also created a problem that threatened the unity of the country itself. As new territories continued to enter the Union, the balance of power between free states and slave states became increasingly fragile. The nation was moving closer and closer to a breaking point. The question of slavery in the Western territories would soon push the United States toward a conflict that would determine the future of the entire nation. As the United States expanded across the continent, the issue of slavery became more dangerous and difficult to control. Each new territory raised the same question again and again. Would slavery be allowed there, or would it be banned? Political leaders in Washington tried to create compromises to keep peace between the northern and southern states, but every new agreement only delayed the conflict rather than solving it. One of the most controversial laws passed during this time was the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. This law allowed the people living in the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves whether slavery would be allowed. The idea was known as popular sovereignty, meaning that settlers would vote on the issue. However, instead of bringing peace, this decision created chaos. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups rushed into Kansas hoping to influence the vote. Violence soon erupted between the two sides, and the territory became known as Bleeding Kansas. Armed groups attacked towns, destroyed property, and killed their political opponents. The conflict in Kansas showed that the disagreement over slavery was becoming impossible to solve peacefully. At the same time, the national political system was beginning to break apart. Old political parties collapsed as new groups formed around the issue of slavery. One of these new parties was the Republican Party, which opposed the expansion of slavery into Western territories. Among the leaders who rose to prominence during this period was Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln believed that slavery should not expand into the new territories of the West. His speeches and debates attracted national attention, especially during his famous debates with Stephen Douglas. Lincoln argued that a nation divided between freedom and slavery could not remain stable forever. As political tensions increased, many Southern leaders began to fear that their influence in the federal government was slowly disappearing. They worried that if slavery could not expand westward, their economic system would eventually collapse. When Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election in 1860, many Southern states believed their future was in danger. Soon after the election, several Southern states announced that they would leave the United States and form a new nation called the Confederate States of America. This decision shocked the country and created the greatest crisis in American history. In 1861, the conflict finally exploded into war when fighting began at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The American Civil War had begun. The war lasted for 4 brutal years and became one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history. Millions of soldiers fought on both sides, and entire cities were destroyed during the fighting. The war was not only a struggle over political power, but also a battle over the future of slavery in the United States. During the war, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, declaring that enslaved people in the Confederate States were free. This decision transformed the war into a fight for freedom as well as national unity. Eventually, the Union Army defeated the Confederacy in 1865. The United States remained one nation, and slavery was officially abolished across the country. Although the war had ended slavery, the nation faced a long and difficult process of rebuilding and healing the deep divisions that the conflict had created. After the Civil War ended in 1865, the United States entered a difficult period known as Reconstruction. The war had destroyed much of the Southern economy, and millions of formerly enslaved people were now free, but faced enormous challenges in building new lives. The government needed to rebuild the South, restore political order, and decide how the newly freed population would become part of American society. During this time, the federal government passed new laws designed to protect the rights of formerly enslaved people. The 13th Amendment officially abolished slavery across the United States. Soon after, the 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal protection under the law to all people born in the country. The 15th Amendment later gave African American men the right to vote. These changes were revolutionary for the nation, but they also created intense resistance in many Southern states. Some groups strongly opposed these new rights and attempted to limit the freedom of African Americans through violence and discriminatory laws. The period of Reconstruction became a struggle between progress and resistance as the country attempted to redefine itself after the devastation of war. While the nation was dealing with these social and political challenges, another transformation was taking place across the American landscape. The country began experiencing rapid industrial growth. Railroads expanded across the continent, connecting distant regions and allowing goods and people to travel faster than ever before. New industries appeared in growing cities, and factories produced steel, textiles, and machinery that fueled economic expansion. The completion of the first transcontinental railroad in 1869 was one of the most important achievements of this period. It connected the eastern and western parts of the country, making travel across the continent possible in a matter of days instead of months. This technological breakthrough accelerated the movement of settlers, merchants, and immigrants into the Western territories. Millions of people from Europe arrived in the United States seeking opportunity. Many immigrants settled in rapidly growing cities such as New York, Chicago, and Boston, where factories offered jobs and new communities began forming. At the same time, farmers continued moving westward to claim land on the Great Plains. The American frontier was constantly shifting as towns appeared in regions that had previously been open wilderness. However, this expansion once again created conflict with Native American tribes who had lived on these lands for generations. The United States government pushed tribes onto reservations and opened large areas of land for settlers and railroad companies. A series of battles and forced relocations occurred as Native American communities resisted the loss of their territories. These conflicts marked another painful chapter in the history of American expansion. Despite these struggles, the country continued growing rapidly during the late 19th century. Cities expanded, industries grew stronger, and new inventions transformed daily life. Electricity, telegraphs, and new machines changed the way Americans worked and communicated. By the end of the 19th century, the United States had become one of the fastest growing industrial nations in the world. The country that had once been a small group of colonies along the Atlantic coast had now expanded across an entire continent. The story of westward expansion had reshaped the geography, economy, and identity of the nation. Yet the transformation of the United States was still far from complete. New challenges would continue to appear as the country entered the 20th century and began taking a larger role in global affairs. By the end of the 19th century, the United States had completely transformed from the small nation that gained independence in 1776. The country now stretched from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific. Cities had grown rapidly, railroads crossed the continent, and millions of people were living in regions that had once been wild frontier. The idea of the frontier had shaped American culture for decades, representing adventure, opportunity, and freedom. However, by the 1890s, historians and political leaders began to realize that the frontier was slowly disappearing. Most of the land across the continent had already been explored, settled, or controlled by the government. The period of westward expansion that had defined much of the 19th century was coming to an end. Yet the impact of this expansion would continue shaping the country's future for generations. The development of railroads and industry created enormous economic growth. Factories produced steel, machinery, and manufactured goods that were sold across the world. American cities became centers of trade, finance, and innovation. At the same time, the United States began developing a stronger presence in international affairs. The country was no longer simply a growing nation within North America. It was beginning to emerge as a global power. The transformation of the American economy also changed the lives of millions of people. Industrial jobs attracted workers from rural areas and immigrants from many different countries. Large cities became crowded with factories, markets, and busy streets filled with workers searching for opportunity. Although many people found success during this period, Others struggled with difficult working conditions, low wages, and crowded living environments. Social reform movements soon began calling for better labor laws, improved working conditions, and stronger protections for workers and families. Meanwhile, the legacy of westward expansion continued to shape the experiences of Native American communities. Many tribes were confined to reservations where traditional ways of life were difficult to maintain. Government policies attempted to force assimilation and limit cultural traditions. These policies created lasting consequences that are still discussed and debated in American society today. Despite these challenges, the United States continued moving forward into a new era. Innovation and invention accelerated rapidly. New technologies such as electricity, telephones, and modern transportation systems began transforming everyday life. Communication across long distances became easier, and businesses were able to operate on a national scale. The country that had once been a collection of distant settlements was now connected through railroads, telegraph lines, and expanding infrastructure. By the beginning of the 20th century, the United States had become one of the most powerful industrial economies in the world. Its population was growing quickly, its cities were expanding, and its political influence was increasing on the global stage. The long journey from a small group of colonies to a continental nation had been shaped by exploration, migration, conflict, and determination. The story of westward expansion remains one of the most dramatic chapters in American history. It was a story of opportunity and ambition, but also a story of struggle, displacement, and transformation. The expansion across the continent changed the landscape of North America forever and helped shape the modern United States that exists today. The legacy of this period continues to influence American culture, politics, and identity even in the modern world. Understanding this history allows us to see how the decisions and events of the past continue shaping the future of nations and the lives of millions of people across the globe.